My name is Maria Chait. I'm a reader in auditory cognitive neuroscience at the UCL Ear Institute. Our big research question relates to trying to understand auditory scene analysis. So what that means is trying to figure out what information in sound listeners or our brains use in order to understand what's going on around us. So recently, work in our lab is concentrated on two major questions. One has to do with change detection. So we're trying to understand how listeners are able to detect new events around them. So you can imagine walking down a street and suddenly hearing, a bus behind you, or suddenly hearing your friend calling your name. Understanding how, what in your brain enables you to detect these new events is important for understanding how we handle really complex environments, and also then important to create hearing devices that help hearing impaired people handle similar situations. Another major question, which is sort of slightly different, has to do with understanding how we detect patterns in sounds. So if you think about it, detecting patterns is a fundamental aspect of hearing. So think about footsteps, for example. So a single footstep is probably completely meaningless. And in most cases, if you hear a single one, you probably won't even recognize it as a footstep. But if I play you a sequence of footsteps, automatically, so without even sort of, paying attention or exerting any effort, you'd be able to first recognize it as footsteps. And B, learn quite a lot about what's going on just from the patterns. So how quickly somebody is walking, where they're going to, maybe something about their weight, or the way they walk, or the surface that they're walking on. And you do this by integrating these events across time. So a lot of work in my lab recently has concentrated on trying to understand how this happens. So how do you detect these patterns? How do you represent not a single event, but a string of events across time? So to try to understand these processes, we use a variety of different techniques. So a lot of the work involves what is called psychophysics. So that means just designing sounds that contain these characteristics that we want to study, and then having people listen to them and perform some kind of task on these sounds that enables us to, from looking at their behavior, sort of understand how little changes that we introduce and whatever sounds we design affect their performance, so whether your brain cares about a certain feature or doesn't. We also use a lot of brain imaging. Brain imaging enables us to understand how your brain processes these sounds, and often we do it in the sense that we use naive listeners. We don't tell them what it is that we want them to do, and we're just trying to understand whether their brains care about certain sounds, whether they respond differently to one sound versus another sound. And if they do, then that would suggest that something about the difference is important to you. And if they don't, then that would suggest that maybe there is a physical difference between the sounds, but you perceptually don't care. In aggregate, a lot of our work is demonstrating that we, or listeners, are amazing pattern detectors. We can listen to very complex sequences of sounds that you've, very likely have never heard before, because we use these artificial sounds in the lab. And still, listeners are able to detect very complex patterns very quickly. In fact, almost as quickly as what is called an ideal observer, so as quickly as mathematically possible. And this is done without explicit effort, so we can see that your brain detects these patterns even if you're doing some kind of other unrelated task. And this, in turn, sort of all of these findings suggest to us that the auditory system is a kind of alarm system, or a kind of an early warning system that sort of scans the environment automatically, even while you are engaged in another task. And then if there's any events that are potentially behaviorally relevant, like changes in the environment, or the emergence of some kind of potentially relevant pattern, then that sort of is brought automatically to your attention, so you can then decide whether you want to really attend to it or not. And this kind of demonstration that normal listeners are so good at this actually accentuates the importance of understanding these processes and then importing them for hearing devices, because clearly, I mean, this is something that in many cases is a matter of life and death. You know, you're walking down the street talking on the phone, and then there's suddenly something important happening behind you that you have to react to in order to, you know, avoid, you know, somebody driving right into you. And we do this naturally all the time, but obviously if you're hearing impaired, then this is something that you can't do very well, and that is important for us to help you, well, to achieve hearing aids that are able to help you handle such situations. So these questions are important for, I mean, at least two reasons. So one has to do with just understanding, you know, understanding the brain. So hearing is a sense that's much less researched than the visual system, for example. And so we understand a lot about, you know, how we see things, how visual information is converted into sort of experiences of the world. But we understand hearing much less. And the other reason is that because we don't understand hearing, so because we don't understand how the normal brain processes sound, we're also not so great at making hearing aids that work well. So by understanding how our brains process auditory information, what information in sound is actually relevant for creating our auditory experiences, we'd be able to design better hearing aids.